The first time I really wrote, was when I did a journal as a teenager. I'd sit at the desk in my room in front of the window and write about what I'd done and what I'd felt. It helped me because neither my family nor anyone else I knew talked much about their feelings. In Amish culture, it's just not something you do. Writing a journal helped me to work out things, and it was interesting to look back on it too. Some things I worried about at 14 really do seem silly to me now. But I'm starting to ramble. Before I go any further, let me tell you a little about me. My name is Sylvia Stoltzfus, and I'm 26 years old. I live only a few miles from where I grew up. I actually live with my sister Emma. We own a little house right near my uncle's farm. We're a little unusual in the fact neither of us are married. Most of our people have quite a number of children by my age. Anyway, the reason I'm writing this is because I have so many people asking me about what happened. Not only does it get tiring telling people the same thing, but I really don't like talking about it. I don't like remembering it or thinking about it. Then my sister said something to me one day. We were sitting in the living room doing something or other when she said, "If you keep holding it in, Sylvia, it's going to fester." Emma is my older sister, and she's always had good advice. I remember when I was 16, one of our neighbors asked me to go to the youth group with him. I was going to say yes and was all excited about it. When I told Emma, she just looked at me and then said, "I don't think he's the one you want to go with." When I asked her why, she said it was just a feeling. Well, I decided not to go out with him after all, and it was a good thing I didn't. He got picked up by the police in a drug bust. So, when my sister said that to me in the living room, I put my head up and looked at her. "What do you mean?" I asked, although I was pretty sure I knew what she meant. She looked at me in that sideways way of hers. "You know what I mean," she said. And so, when the newspaper approached me to write about my experience, I felt like it would be the way to work it out. I'd get it on paper and flush it out of my system. That's what I hope, anyway. It all started with a phone call. I happened to be outside weeding the garden when I heard the phone ringing in our phone booth. We don't keep phones in our houses. They are inside little sheds outside. Anyway, I heard the phone ringing, so I ran over and picked it up. "Oh, Sylvia, you actually picked up," said the voice on the other end. It was Ken. He drove one of the taxis we used when we had to go somewhere too far for the buggy. "I was in the garden," I said. "Well, I think I might have found a client for you," he said. I clean houses for a living. Ken keeps his ears open for possible clients for me. I got in a nice bit of work through him. "Oh, really?" I asked. "Who are they?" "Well, this is a bit unusual. It's a doctor and his family. His wife isn't in the greatest health, and he works up at the hospital. They live a ways out. Anyway, they're looking for someone to kind of be a live-in housekeeper, just for a month. You'd be away from home, but you could come back for church on Sundays, and it pays very well." "I'm not a nurse, though," I said. I didn't really like the thought of living in someone's house, but I didn't want to seem ungracious. "Oh, they don't need a nurse," he said. "Just someone to do cleaning and cooking, things like that." I was just getting ready to say I'd think about it just to be polite. I had already decided no, but then he told me how much they were paying. It was a lot. More than I would usually make in 4 months. "Well," I said, "I'll have to think about it." I meant it that time. We weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy by any means. I didn't have much savings, and the buggy we had probably would need to be replaced soon. And maybe this job wouldn't be so bad. It was only a month after all. I asked Emma what she thought, going over the pros and cons out loud. "Well," she said, shrugging her shoulders, "I suppose you can meet them first?" "Yes, Ken said I would meet them and then I could decide." So that Friday I met Dr. Reginald Wheeler at a coffee shop. He was a good-looking man around 50. He definitely had a way with him. I guess you could call it charisma. He was very polite to me and friendly, telling me about how his wife was having a hard time. "She's not in good health," he said. "She pushed herself too hard and really needs someone to do things while she rests. It's only for a month." "Are you sure you don't need someone who has medical experience?" I asked. "Oh, no, nothing like that. It's just stress and being tired. My son and daughter and her boyfriend also live with us, but you'll barely see them. As long as you don't mind cooking for 5 people. When you have 8 brothers and sisters, 5 doesn't seem like a whole lot, I said. He laughed. I ended up taking the job. I was going to start next week. They lived in the southwestern part of the county, a place I'd never been. A lot of people think Lancaster County is just farms. There are a lot of farms, but there is also a city and shopping malls and big stores and housing developments. There are also woods, and the woods was where the Wheelers lived. It would certainly be a change from all the open space I was used to seeing every day. The day came when I was to go to the Wheelers. Dr. Wheeler picked me up in a big black car. We started off, and soon the farmland disappeared, and we were driving through roads twisting through the trees. I was really surprised at how different that part of the county was. It felt like I was hours away from home, instead of only a half hour or so. It felt remote, and there was something about it that unsettled me. The gray, drizzly weather didn't make it look cheerful. We drove across a crumbling one-lane bridge where someone had spray-painted on the walls. Some of it was just strange squiggles, but there were also words like death, go back, and 666, which I suppose is really a number, not a word. That made everything seem even creepier. We turned off the road and onto a long driveway that twisted up a steep hill. I saw the house. It was a big old house with a wraparound front porch, rounded towers, and fancy gingerbread flourishes everywhere. Dr. Wheeler stopped the car, got out, and opened the door for me. "It seems far from the hospital," I said. Not as far as you think. Only a little over 30 minutes, he said. We could live closer, but it's worth it to me to live out here where it's quiet and peaceful. I could think of other places that were quiet, and I wouldn't say it was peaceful. There was something about this whole place that made me feel uneasy. I didn't say that, of course. I followed Dr. Wheeler up the steps onto the porch, and he unlocked the front door. We walked into a big front hall. There was wood paneling everywhere, and there was a musty odor. A small lamp with a dark stained glass shade stood on the table. The little bit of light from it seemed sucked up into the dark wood. There wasn't a sound in the house, except ticking from a grandfather clock. You have to come and meet my wife, said Dr. Wheeler, putting my suitcase down. I said I'd like that, and followed him through a doorway off the hallway. Dr. Wheeler switched on the light. I was standing in the living room. It was a big room with tall ceilings and cluttered with furniture, knickknacks, and bookshelves. All the curtains were closed. In a brown recliner was a woman covered with an old quilt. She was heavy-set with long gray hair and big round glasses. Well, Kathy, said Dr. Wheeler as he came behind the chair, here's Miss Stoltzfus. Good afternoon, I said. Mrs. Wheeler looked at me with an expressionless face. It's a big house, she finally said. It looks like it, I said, but I've done work in big houses before. She made a noise that sounded like, and then leaned back in her chair. Dr. Wheeler smiled at me. Well, I just wanted you two to say hello, he said. But I see you're tired, Kathy, so we'll leave you alone. I followed him out of the room, taking one more glance at the woman in the recliner. Well, I liked Dr. Wheeler, but I didn't think I liked Mrs. Wheeler very much. I told myself that it was a bit unfair since I'd only met her for a minute. Still, first impressions are first impressions, right or not. Back in the front hallway, Dr. Wheeler led me up the big creaking staircase and to my room. It was in front of the house, in one of the towers with big windows. There was a big 4-poster bed with a quilt and huge old-fashioned furniture. Light switches here, said the doctor, flipping it on. You are allowed to use the light switches? Yes, I said, laughing a little. Sorry, he said, looking a bit sheepish. I thought the Amish didn't use electricity. Well, we don't have electric lights and outlets in our houses, but we can use electricity, I said. People do have odd ideas about what we do and don't do sometimes. I don't know too much about the Amish way of doing things, he said. It's interesting to me, though. I suppose all this comes from the teachings of someone? Well, we had our church fathers, I said. I hoped he wouldn't ask me too much, because I'm not good at explaining these things. I honestly don't understand it all myself. When you grow up Amish, all the things people think are strange are just what you do. You don't really think about all the whys." To my relief, he didn't ask any more. "Well," he said, "make yourself comfortable, and then I can show you around the house so you know where everything is." I unpacked what I had, which didn't take long, then went downstairs. From one of the rooms off the hall there was a loud clattering noise. I put my head in. Dr. Wheeler was sitting at the dining room table, typing away on an ancient-looking typewriter. I stood in the door for a minute. Unlike the living room, which was cluttered, this room was bare, except for the table and chairs. It had very old wallpaper and a stained ceiling. There was a swinging door that probably went to the kitchen. I cleared my throat, and Dr. Wheeler looked up. "Oh, good, you've unpacked?" he asked. "Yes, I have," I said. "You don't see many people using typewriters anymore." "It's a bit of a family heirloom," he said. "I do my journal on it. It's different than typing on a computer. It's like a link to the past." He stood up. "Well, let me give you a tour." He took me through the swinging door and through a pantry which went into the kitchen. It was a big kitchen, but very old. The cabinets looked like they hadn't been replaced in 100 years. The stove, while significantly newer, was also old. "Do you need me to show you how anything works?" he asked. "No, I know how it all works," I said, slightly amused. He probably didn't know I had a modern refrigerator and a stove in my own house. I think some people are under the impression that we use hand pumps and coal-burning stoves. "Of course," he said, "and the laundry room is right through here." He showed me all around the house, which was quite big. There was a sadly neglected greenhouse in the back, with broken pots and dead plants. Most of the house looked pretty neglected, I thought. There were old water stains on the ceilings, and the musty smell seemed to be everywhere. We ended the tour back in the front hallway. "Well, I hope that gives you a feel for the house," he said. "Yes, thank you," I said. Outside, I heard the sound of footsteps creaking on the porch. The door opened, and in came the two strangest-looking people I'd ever laid eyes on. They were probably in their early 20s, both dressed head to toe in black. The girl had spiky black hair, black makeup on her eyelids, and black fingernails. I can't even really describe her clothes. They looked old-fashioned in a way, but not exactly, if you know what I mean. She was wearing what looked like fishnets on her legs. Around her neck was a thick collar with spikes on it. The guy next to her was dressed just as strangely. He also had black makeup and black fingernails, with metal spikes and chains all over his clothes. Then I saw his eyes. They were completely black. It was one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen. I couldn't even tell where he was looking. They were like burning holes which seemed dead, but also with something behind them. It's difficult to explain. I tried not to stare too much, but my eyes kept going back to him. "This is my daughter Jan and her boyfriend Steve," said Dr. Wheeler. I nodded at them. "Hello," I said. They both muttered something at me, then tread upstairs. "I don't think my son is home yet," said Dr. Wheeler with what sounded like forced cheerfulness. "His name's Bruce." I didn't say anything, but I hoped Bruce wasn't like those two. "Well," Dr. Wheeler said, "I have work to do, but if you need anything, I'll be in my study." He strode away, leaving me in the twilight of the hallway. For dinner that night, I made meatloaf, string beans, and brown buttered noodles. I also made pumpkin pie, because it's relatively easy and most people like it. There was an old gong in the front hall, which Dr. Wheeler told me to bang when everything was ready. It was a little odd doing that. In my house, we always used to yell. It was a very gloomy group of people at the table, except for Dr. Wheeler. Mrs. Wheeler said nothing, and the two people in black only talked to each other in mutters. I still hadn't seen the other son. He wasn't there when they had all sat down. I kept myself busy bringing things and taking platters and trying to stay out of the room as much as possible. I was a little afraid Dr. Wheeler might ask me to sit with them. I've been to funerals that are pleasanter occasions. About halfway through the meal, I heard the front door open, and a youngish man came in. I'm not very good at telling people's ages, but if I had to guess, he was around 30. He was good-looking, with blonde hair and chiseled features, but very glum-looking, too. "You're back a little late," said Dr. Wheeler. "Sorry," said the man. "This is Bruce," Dr. Wheeler said to me. "Nice to meet you. Would you like a plate?" I asked. Yes, thanks," he said. Well, I thought as I went into the kitchen, thank heaven he wasn't crazy like that Steve. I tried to walk behind his chair when I went to and from the table so I didn't have to see his black eyes. I brought Bruce out his plate. He talked to Dr. Wheeler a little. I gathered he worked in the hospital too, because they seemed to be talking about co-workers and regulations and that sort of thing. It was after dinner, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up. At least they'd seemed to like my cooking. They'd polished off everything like they had. Even so, as I put the dishes in the washer, it was crossing my mind whether or not I'd made a mistake in signing up for this. I didn't like the woods, or the musty house, or the people in it, except for Dr. Wheeler. It was only a month, though, and I could keep myself busy and out of everyone's way as much as possible. I went up to my room after I'd finished, and sat in the big bed feeling depressed and homesick. I picked up my chapter book and read for a while to fall asleep. The words on the pages started to mix with my dreams. I was in a room, a windowless stone room. I knew I was trapped. I saw something start to drip through the walls, something dark and red. It was blood. I woke up with a start. The light next to my bed was still on, and the book had fallen out of my hands onto the floor. I was breathing heavily. What a great way to spend a first night having a nightmare. I settled myself back against the pillows and turned off the light. My breathing was just starting to get even again when there was a pounding at my door. My heart leapt and I reached over and switched the light back on. The pounding kept going, like someone was standing outside, hammering their fist against the door. "Who is it?" I called out. I thought I heard a voice, but it was so muffled and faint I could barely hear it, let alone tell what it was saying. I got out of bed, went to the door, and opened it. There was no one there. The house was completely quiet. There was no banging and no voices and nobody in the hallway. I didn't see how they could have gotten away that fast because the banging was still happening when I grabbed the door handle. I stood there, listening to see if anyone else in the house had heard it. With that much racket, someone else should have woken up. But no one else came. I was completely dumbfounded. But I wasn't just going to keep standing there. I closed the door and got back into bed. I left the light on for a while. I didn't feel tired at all. I just lay there, tense, bracing myself for the pounding to start again. I lay there for a while, but there was no other sound. I started wondering if maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe I'd been half asleep when I'd gone over to the door. That must be it. Feeling a little better that I'd come up with an answer, I turned off the light and eventually fell back to sleep.